Friday night. Welcome, ladies, to the Rise Up special guest speaker series. I am thrilled this evening to introduce you to our special guest this evening. Now, this man, if you don't know, has been pivotal to iKickSugar journey, as well as my own personal journey. He is a pioneer in regenerative medicine. He has won the Phoenix Magazine Top Doctor Awards not one, four times, and is one of the country's leading peripheral nerve surgeons, specializing in nerve decompression and diabetic neuropathy. Now, over his 49 years of experience, he has treated thousands of patients and successfully treated many patients who would have otherwise had an amputation. Yikes. I mean, he is trained directly under Dr. Dellon, the creator of this groundbreaking procedure at John Hopkins University in Baltimore, and became an expert in what is known as the Dellon surgical procedure, which is a type of nerve decompression used to restore sensation. It's used to relieve pain and prevent ulceration and amputation. So without further ado, it is my great honor to introduce to you podiatrist and author of the best-selling book, provocative, can I say, book, Sugar Crush, Dr. Richard Jacoby of Extremity Health Centers here in Arizona. I'm so excited about that. I believe this man actually to be among the very best and brightest in his field, and is a true honor to have you join us tonight. I am so excited. So thank you so much, Dr. Jacoby, and welcome.
Well, you need more excitement in your voice, you know?
I've got it, I'm telling you.
Wow. Yeah, this ought to be fun. I'm excited to be here. I know you have such passion for this work. So let's get right into it. Let's get provocative.
I love it. Well, you know, I'm lucky because you're in Arizona, I'm in Arizona, and you know, you really have, I just want to say this, you really have played a pivotal role. I mean, that's where my excitement is in my iKickSugar journey, as well as my own personal health journey, so much that I even wrote an acknowledgement at the end of my course. I don't know if you're aware of that, but if you pick it up and you look in the back, you'll see that you're named back there. And I first met you, you know, I was thinking about this other day as a patient when I came to see you in your Scottsdale clinic, and it was 10 years ago. I can't believe it.
God.
Yeah, it's been that long. I know I don't age at all, right?
Neither
do you. And I came to you for Reynolds syndrome, which for those of you watching, you know, if you don't know what that is, it's due to poor circulation in your hands and feet. I've had it since I was a little kid. And it's where your hands and feet will get really, really cold, even in 110 degrees here in Arizona. My feet will be freezing. I'm wearing my Ugg boots in the summer. They turn purple. Well, I should say they used to. They turn purple and they can go completely numb and lose sensation. So, you know, I came to see you for this. And up until that point, every doctor that I'd gone to told me, don't worry about it, Joyce. You know, it's just what it is, and you're going to have to deal with it, and there's nothing we can do about it. I remember so clearly, you know, when I saw you, the very first thing you were doing, you were examining my feet, and you started questioning me on my diet. And you're like, you asked me like, are you eating gluten? I don't know if I even heard of gluten then. And how much sugar was I eating? What supplements were I taking? Was I taking any supplements? It just blew me away because no doctor has said that. What doctor asks these questions about your diet? It was like baffling to me. And it was your compassion, you know, and your unconventional philosophy that drove me to investigate. When I left there, I was like, investigate my diet and really start diving into that. What is he talking about? And looking into this. And it helped just you helped spark that curiosity for me to explore even further my connection to health and to what I was eating, that connection. And I remember begging you, like, can you just, I came back, I was like, could you just be my doctor for everything, you know, more, okay, not just my foot doctor, all of it, but by the way you question things and look at things so differently. And I wish every doctor truly could be like you and take the time with their patients. You know, you took that time, you listened to me, you showed compassion, you didn't brush off my feelings. Doctors are so quick to do that with their patients. Concerns, you know, theories, because you actually, you know, you sent me on this path to go seek out from you. I went to go seek 2 gastroenterologists and get tested for celiac disease and gluten sensitivity, and you were spot on with that. I started exploring sugar sensitivity. That was a whole new thing to me. And addiction, you know, and to realize that addiction is a real thing with sugar, that it was real. And up until then, I had felt sugar addiction was just all in my mind. And so you were that spark, that authoritarian voice that told me and gave me permission to move forward on that journey and to start investigating. So thank you. Thank you for that. And it's just rare, you know, in Western philosophy, to see an MD, a doctor, a medically trained doctor, to have such unique holistic approach and understanding and how sugar harms the body, and you know, who advocates like you advocate to your patients to kick sugar and carbs, and, you know, and help them heal their nerves that way and to reverse type 2 diabetes. It's just you know, you're immersed in it all day long and it's just who you are. But I need you to get this message tonight, that that's just very rare and you are a special anomaly. And my ladies also, they know that. That's why we're also excited to have you tonight. We're going to dive into questions tonight that they've asked you also, because we, you know, we don't get that experience from doctors. They just want to prescribe pills and perform procedures, but not you. I mean, you surely this isn't the first time you've heard this. You must hear this from patients. Do you?
I do.
Yeah.
Thank you for that introduction. I mean, that was really beautiful. And I
Thanks.
forgot about the Reynolds connection.
Yeah.
And that's a really important connection because that is part of sugar.
Mm-hmm.
You would not think that, or I certainly didn't think about that years ago when I trained in Philadelphia. That was not taught. It wasn't even mentioned. Reynolds phenomena and Reynolds disease were a very subset of diseases. More on the East Coast, by the way, it was linked more to cigarette smoking, certainly not our diet. And it is a very debilitating disease on the East Coast because it's colder there. So when you get a vasoconstrictive process, that is painful and it can lead to gangrene. So
Oh.
in the West here, we don't have as much Raynaud's, but I still see it. And it is linked to sugar, is vasospastic. And it's amazing that that was our introduction, that you and I.
Yeah.
And I have to give Dr. Dellon all the credit, because if it wasn't for him, I would not have known any of this. I was the typical doctor, and thank you for the compliments, but that wasn't me 20 years ago.
Wow.
I was a typical doctor. I was running the wound care center at Scottsdale Healthcare, which is now Honor Thy Health.
Okay.
That's what I call them. And it's all about big pharma. There's procedures and pills. That's it. There's no questioning. I opened that wound care center 35 years ago for that hospital because we were seeing lots and lots of gangrene and amputations. It didn't cross my mind, even though I knew sugar was obviously causing diabetes. I just really never thought of it in that fashion.
Right.
And Dr. Dellon came to the hospital about 20 years ago, and he gave a lecture, and he said, "Why do you podiatrists cut the nerve out in the foot, Morton's neuroma in the foot?" I said, "Well, that's what we were taught." And that started the conversation, just like the conversation I had with you. And that's what it really takes. And shows like this, and I call it a show, this is how we learn. We don't learn from lectures, we learn from conversations, questions and answers, and really digging into it and chewing on the problem to get to the bottom line. And I really appreciate what you're doing. And Dr. Dellon did the same thing for me. He opened a door, asked a question. I said, "Well, that's what we were taught." So he said, come on down to Johns Hopkins. And as you know, that is the finest medical program in the world. And he's the most knowledgeable person on this process of sugar and nerve compression. And he had a patient, same way with you. He had a patient, and the patient said to him, Dr. Dellon, you fixed my carpal tunnel and you fixed my ulnar tunnel, which is the nerve in the elbow. Why don't you fix my feet? And he said, well, that's a different disease. This was 1984. And he said, that's a different disease, but he's a really bright guy and you would love him. You should have him on your show.
Yeah.
And he said, well, maybe there is a connection. Now, he had all the resources at Johns Hopkins, and he went to the laboratory and he looked at mice and made them into diabetic. He did surgery on their little paws, took the tarsal tunnel out, and had them walk across paper with ink, and saw that if
we lost you. Hold on, we can't hear you. We've lost your sound, Dr. Jacoby. Something happened with your hand. Try hitting the unmute again.
I don't see a mute button.
Oh, there we go. That's it.
Really?
Watch your hand doesn't get in the way of the viewing. Yeah, move it off to the side. Nope, now we lost your view. Hold on, everyone. We're losing the doc here. We got to revive him. You're back.
I'm back. Okay.
Okay.
So
tarsal tunnel.
Tarsal tunnel, carpal tunnel. Dr. Dellon made that distinction and connection.
Yeah.
And he said that therefore, carpal tunnel of the wrist, the median nerve, and the tarsal tunnel of the ankle, which is the posterior tibial nerve, is really the same thing.
Right.
Diabetic neuropathy and carpal tunnel are exactly the same thing. They're compression neuropathies. Yeah. And then he extended that to all the nerves in the leg. I, unfortunately, said to him, after I've done maybe 3,000 or 4,000 of those procedures, I said, Dr. Dellon, I think there's more to your theory. And he said to me, what do you mean? I said, well, if the wrist is the same and the ankle is the same, wouldn't all nerves throughout the body be the same? And he said, you figured out. Not nicely. He was, he had done all his work. He has written 2 textbooks, 700 articles, if you can imagine it, 700, and 75 chapters in textbooks. He said, you figured out. I said, oh, yeah.
He was done.
He was done. He's really not. He's still writing. He's prolific. But anyway, I said, well, I don't really read that literature that he does. I read my own world. So I said, well, okay, I'm going to go outside the box. I'll read other things that I never read. And I was lucky. I got an article from Circulation Journal, and it was called the Uber marker, asymmetric dimethylarginine, the Uber marker for cardiovascular disease. The word that really caught my eye was Uber. This was 2004. That was a new word to me.
That was before Uber came out.
Before Uber. And I thought, that's an interesting, what's this about? So I read the articles written by Dr. John Cook. And if you want to look it up, it's a great article. He spells his name with an E, Cooke. Okay. And I said, so I read the article and it was interesting to me. And I texted Dr. Cook, and he was at Stanford at the time. I said, Dr. Cook, Dr. Dellon has the theory. You have the vascular connection to this theory. I think they have something to do with each other. He called me on the phone the same day, which is amazing. He's a cardiologist by training, has a PhD in vascular biology. He runs the Cook Vascular Lab at Stanford. Okay. And he calls me on the phone and he says, I like your theory. Come up to Stanford. Let's work on it. I'm shortening the story, but we did. I tested his molecule on my patients, and I came up with all these connections with all the other nerves, and in particular muscular or multiple sclerosis.
Wow.
And was high with that molecule. And I said, Dr. Cook, look at this. He said, well, you're like this. He says, quit your practice, come up and work with me at Stanford. I said, well, kids are like 10 years old. Now, who's going to read this anyway? It's going to take 15 years to make the connection. I'll write a book. That's why I wrote the book. Well, the connection is real. The real scientists did figure it out. And asymmetric dimethylarginine is the molecule that links Dr. Dellon's theory with Dr. Cook's theory. And it connects all the other neuropathies, in my opinion. Now, we got a lot of work to do. These itises that I call them are really nothing more than manifestations of the inflammation of sugar on different nerves. So we call it MS. I think autism is definitely part of this issue. I think Alzheimer's for sure is part of this, and I can explain that. And so I went through all the nerves and the peripheral nerves, the cranial nerves, and I went, oh my God, this is really over time, over the last 300 or 400 years, as doctors discovered these inflammatory conditions, they got their name on them, and they sound like separate and distinct diseases. They are not. They're the same disease, and it's sugar, and epigenetics helps explain the connection. So that's what the book really is about.
Yeah, amazing. It's an amazing book. Amazing. And you did do a great job with that. Some of my women also, you know, so many have already bought the book. If you haven't, you guys pick it up. You have all the links to get it. It's everywhere on the membership site. It does such a great job with also, like, you know, you give tests and quizzes and point out, like, to make, you know, find out if you have the markers for this, if you have the signs and the symptoms, you know, and you're headed in that direction of type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance. And then you even give, you know, the great example of meals and diets, you know, at the end, working with a nutritionist and having that. So it's phenomenal. I want to dive into the book also, because what grabbed my attention right away, and I want to read something, a little expert from this, for the women who haven't gotten it yet. And ladies, you're going to want to get it after you hear this. I mean, this is right up my alley, at least. But you kind of, you know, that's what you kind of did with the book. You jumped right into the book. So I'm going to jump right in here. And it blows my mind. It's in the introduction. And I want to read this just because it creates a really powerful visual also of what's going to happen if people don't kick sugar, change their diet, you know, get rid of the gluten, make those dietary necessary changes that are said. And what you wrote was, wow, the visual. So here, I'm just going to read it, you guys, instead of talking. As a young surgical student in Philadelphia, I experienced my first amputation to remove a gangrenous leg from a man suffering with diabetes. Even though I'd spend the next 30 years as a podiatric surgeon and conduct tens of thousands of foot surgeries, including amputations on patients with diabetes, this first gruesome procedure is the one I remember most. I was the third assistant. My job was to hold the rotting leg as the orthopedic surgeon sawed it off just above the knee. The stench of the gangrenous leg is putrid and overpowering, so much so that we have to put peppermint oil in our masks to endure it. As I held the leg and struggled with the smell, the sound of the saw, I was struck not only by the impersonal, awful nature of the procedure, but the enormous weight of the diseased leg as it fell into my arms. I stood confused in the middle of the room, clutching this heavy burden and wondering what to do with it. I saw a nurse nod toward the medical waste container. No longer viable, this once healthy, functioning leg was now trash. It almost makes me want to cry.
Wow,
I mean,
you do that great. You almost made me cry.
I mean, it's
God,
just so sad because it was a part of somebody's body, and to see what happened there. And it really, like, I mean, I suppose this also hit home for me so much because my uncle had juvenile type 1 diabetes. My sister, I think I've told you, also has type 1 diabetes, juvenile. But my uncle spent the last 10 years of his life in a nursing home bed, dying a slow, painful death. Everything that can happen to a type 1 diabetic that you talk about in your book happened to him. He went blind, he had kidney failure, his toes, although he refused any care, they needed to be amputated. He refused to have that. And so when I read this, I was like, oh my gosh, like this was my uncle, you know, like this is real. These are people. This is happening to people. You've seen this. And, you know, just let's start from the beginning. You talked a little bit about it, but I want you also to pretend, first of all, that today that you're visiting elementary school. Okay. I need you to be, you do a lot of science in here, which I love. I mean, I'm Googling a lot of stuff when I'm reading your book. What's this word? What's this word? What's this definition? So to prevent us all from running to Google as you're talking to look things up, let's try and pretend you're talking in an elementary school tonight. Because the book is packed with scientific information and research, and it builds the strong case that is needed, you know, and a great argument there. But explain, if you can, really simplified, why sugar is killing us, you know, what it's doing, the science, the breakdown of the science in the most elementary way, what's happening in the body, the biology, the biochemistry, you know, that's causing these complications that you talk about, like the blindness, the foot ulcers, the amputations, all of that. If you could, please.
Oh boy, you are good. Okay, I want to tell you, you are good. And it's interesting. We were talking about Hussein, my assistant. So his family's from Baghdad,
Okay.
and he speaks Arabic. And I asked him about that word. That's an Arabic word, sugar, sukkar. That's where it came from. So let's go way back.
Okay.
And we have Columbus, and he's petitioning Ferdinand and Isabella from Spain, and he has maps from Portuguese who had been to Puerto Rico 50 years before he came to the Americas, by the way.
Okay.
And the spices, one of them was sugar. He wanted to find where that was coming from, and the Arabs had it, and that's why that word is sugar, from the Arabic word. Anyway, he gets the maps, gets the money from Isabel and Ferdinand, leases the ships, by the way, comes to the Americas, finds the West Indies, and it's a perfect place to grow sugar. Brings lots of stuff back. He had silver and all sorts of things. But then the land rush was on. He came back the next year, which shocked me, with 1,000 sailors and 21 ships, not 3. So they started planting sugar, and that's how our country was founded, on sugar. In the 1400s, there's very, very small amount of sugar in Europe. By the 1600s, it was massively being imported, but its price was $1,000 a pound in the 1600s. So who had the disease? The rich, not the poor, the rich, because they were eating sugar like cocaine today.
Right.
And they had sugar parties, and they had migraine headaches, they had diabetes, they had gout, they had all the quote unquote consumption diseases of today. And MS was first talked about by Charcot in the 1600s.
Wow.
So as we speed that up, so when you really look at the medical literature, which I did, and you look at a guy like Charcot-Marie tooth disease, Charcot arthropathy of the foot, which is caused by sugar. But he did not know that that was the cause. He was just explaining what he saw. Let's take a look, like MS, multiple sclerosis.
Yeah.
He opened the skull on deceased patients that he was taking care of at autopsy, and noticed multiple areas of white spots on the brain, which we know as multiple sclerosis. What were those spots? It was sugar. It caused inflammation and fibrosis. That's how we heal from inflammation. And that affects the brain and the spinal cord of the cervical portion of the spinal cord, not the entire spinal cord. So see how we start to compartmentalize those diseases, as if that's a separate disease. No, that's a separate place where it's inflamed. So we get into epigenetics. So let's start with that. If you're carrying the genes that will express inflammation on the spinal cord and the brain, then we call it MS. If it's in the foot, then we call it diabetic polyneuropathy. So your question is, how does that sugar cause that?
Right.
Well, this is what I learned from Dr. Dellon, and he learned this from other doctors as well.
Okay.
So there's the first pathway is called the sorbitol pathway, polyol pathway, and sugar gets inside the nerve, and it cannot process the sugar fast enough, so it turns it into an alcohol sugar, which is called sorbitol. So when you see, by the way, when you're looking at labels, if you see OL on the end of the word, that's an alcohol sugar. If it's OSE, then that's regular sugar, mantose, galactose, glucose, fructose, they're the sugars. They're all bad. None of them are good. Now, we love sugar, but the body is not equipped to process sugar, but it will cause disease and inflammation. So that's the first one. So what happens, the sugar, sorbitol, pulls water into the nerve and swells the nerve. That's point number one. Well established.
So that's where we're getting the inflammation from that right there.
Exactly. A physical change of the nerve, it makes it bigger.
Right.
Okay, number one. Number two, the Maillard reaction. That's a French word. I don't pronounce it correctly. I pronounce it like a Philadelphia person. I am Maillard. No, it's really milieu.
Okay.
I can't say that. So what is that? That's a cooking term, basically. So when you take sugar plus a protein, collagen, like the soft tissue, that's what cataracts are. That's what wrinkles are. It's collagen tissue that linked with sugar, it causes it to contract.
Okay.
That's what it is. And it does the same thing to nerves. So the Maillard reaction causes the tunnel that nerves go through. And let's talk about look at the audience, just look at your wrist, the inside of your wrist. And you see your thumb, and that nerve is right in the middle of that wrist. And if you pressed on that, you're going to shut off the blood supply right there to the thumb, the muscle that leads to the thumb. And the function of that nerve and that muscle is to grip your fingers together. That's its function. And if it's compressed there, that's called carpal tunnel. It's not that complicated, but it sounds complicated because it's a different function with a different nerve, and it is painful. It goes through the 5 phases of compression, from numbness and tingling to loss of function. It's
trigger finger the same thing, trigger fingers?
Yes, on a different finger, on the collagen by the Maillard reaction. Absolutely. Okay, so that's one of the processes of sugar. The third pathway is the blood supply to the nerve. That was Dr. Cook's contribution. He was studying asymmetric dimethylarginine. Now let's break that word down, because I have to break it down, because most people never took biochemistry. We take a lot of that, so that's not foreign to us. But the explanation of asymmetric dimethylarginine is foreign to most doctors. They don't stop to think of what that word really means. So A in Latin means no. So not symmetrical. Symmetrical means the methyl group should be on either side of the arginine group. So let me use, because I'm holding an iPad, so I can't use my hands. It's very difficult. So Joyce, let's have you do that. So hold up both hands in front of the camera. So they're going to be methyl groups, okay? They're on either side of the arginine molecule, which is in the middle. Now take both hands and put them on the same side. Like so put them onto either right or left of your face. There we go.
Oh, like this.
That's asymmetric. They're both on one side, not on either side. That's a big deal in biochemistry. That blocks the nitric oxide pathway. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important, and let's go back to my conversation with Dr. Cook. Now, he's written 500 articles, and I'm kind of sneaky when it comes to that, because I don't want to have to read every one of those articles. So, hey, Dr. Cook, walk me through the biochemistry. And he's the world's leading authority, so he does. So the first question I asked him, I said, Dr. Cook, I'm confused about this cholesterol issue. No, I'm really not confused, but I'm kind of like, what's that guy, the detective, that used to pretend he didn't understand.
Well, I want to say Professor, oh my God,
Oh,
Pink
Clouseau
Panther.
or
Yeah,
Pink
Clouseau.
Panther or
Yeah,
Clouseau.
yeah.
Yeah, and then Palumbo.
Oh, yes, Columbo.
Remember, he knew the answer to the question. So I'm being kind of like that. So, but Dr. Cook says, well, here's how to explain it. So my question to him, why are we fixated on this cholesterol issue? He said, well, it's really sugar. I said, really? Then why are we trying to lower cholesterol? And really what he's saying is that's the accepted biology. And the funding that goes to these universities comes from big pharma. And if you deviate from the narrative, you're not going to get funded. Okay. So, but that's my first question. So he said, well, here's how it works. Sugar causes inflammation, and the lining of the blood vessel, which is the endothelium, attracts that inflammation and makes it like, instead of Teflon, smooth,
Right.
it makes it like Velcro. So the signaling molecule, which is cholesterol, and it comes to that area of inflammation and it puts down, and I use the word spackle, that's an old word, to seal like a hole in the wall.
Yeah.
But that's what plaque is.
Yeah.
So it seals that. And every time you eat sugar, cholesterol comes and tries to seal that off, and it builds it up, and that's plaque. So why would we lower cholesterol when we should be lowering sugar? And the answer is
sugar.
there's no money in that sentence.
Of course.
All the money is in the cholesterol lowering hypothesis. It's a fraud.
Yeah.
Actually, I originally called my book The Nerve of It.
I remember you telling me that. Yeah.
And my editor said, oh my God, I remember, you know what she said? It's a double entendre and it doesn't fit the zeitgeist. Meaning, I said, oh, what did you just say? And she was absolutely correct. When I was writing the book around 2010, it didn't fit the right zeitgeist, but it does today, by the way.
It sure does.
And we'll get into the modern day inflammatory diseases, including COVID, by the way.
Yeah.
But this is the original question I asked Dr. Cook. So he walked me through that. And then I said, what do you think is causing the elevation of asymmetric dimethylarginine? And he said, we don't know. And of course, I said to him, do you think it's meteorites? Or do you think it's something simple in the diet like sugar? He said, well, we don't know. We need research, which is code for give me $1,000 for a couple of million and I'll figure it out for you. So I didn't have a couple of million, but that's the answer. The answer is sugar, and specifically high fructose corn syrup. So there are the three biochemical pathways that cause compression of the nerve, artery, and vein as they go through these tunnels.
Yes.
Carpal tunnel is one tunnel, the foot is another, and there's many, many different tunnels throughout the body that get compressed, and the end organ damage, we call them diseases. Right. So that's what my theory is really about, the global compression theory of all these different compressions, same disease, same mechanism, different genetics for sure. And we get into epigenetics, which is an interesting subject. Yeah. And so that's the basis for my theory. I think it makes a lot of sense, but a lot of doctors don't, because they're so engrossed in their knowledge of pharmaceuticals. I am too. Yeah. But that's silly. If you're on a drug, you got a problem. You should be getting off the drug, not on another drug.
Right. Get to the root of it.
Your problem. And it's really that simple. It's sugar.
Yeah. I know. It's just so simple that no one wants to hear it. It has to be more complicated, and you connect the dots in here to so many different diseases, itises, all of it. MS, blew me away. When I first read this book almost 6 years ago, it was actually the first time I had heard of the connection with Alzheimer's and sugar and the peanut
Mhm.
butter test and
Oh
smelling
yeah, yeah.
peanut butter. My father just had gotten diagnosed. He just passed this past June from Alzheimer's, 91 years old. And it's a horrible disease. And to hear, you were the first person that I read. And then it's funny, then it's just, now I'm hearing it on every podcast, health podcast there can be. It's just becoming more accepted. Alzheimer's, type 3 diabetes, I mean,
Yeah,
so
let's talk about that. See on
yeah,
the front of the book,
yeah,
the neurologist that makes that comment. Read that comment.
yes.
That's interesting.
Are you talking about David
The
from
the
Brain Grain or from in the back?
yes, yes,
Yeah.
brain.
Yeah, brings laser focus to the powerfully detrimental role of sugar and carbohydrates as a direct toxins to the body. Is that the one you wanted? Yeah.
Yes. So he is the one that wrote the book Brain,
Yeah.
and he is a neurologist. Now, I've never met him personally, but he read the galley proofs of the book and wanted to be on the front. I would love to have the conversation with him, but we have never hooked up.
Wow.
Now, this is why this would be an interesting conversation.
Mm-hmm.
He totally agrees with what I'm saying, but totally disagrees with the mechanism of action.
Yeah.
And the reason I think it's an important debate that has not been done, and he's a phenomenal neurologist.
Yeah.
So he's calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes.
Right.
I'm saying, and I'm going to make another statement here.
Okay.
There are no types. It's all the same.
Right.
Type
Right.
1, type 2, type 3, type 4, we can go on forever. It's the same process. The difference is epigenetics. How many genes do you have that are going to express? Now, I'll give you an example. And I always say a little old lady, it could be a little old man, but little old lady, she's smoking Camels. She's 94 years old. She drinks scotch every night. And she says, what's the problem? She doesn't have the genes that affect her. So she, I don't know if you know that word, spurious feedback, which
Mm-mm.
means you base your logic on, she's sitting there and said, sugar, alcohol, cigarettes, they're not bad for her.
Sounds like George Burns.
Yeah, every one of her friends is dead. That's spurious feedback. She thinks, well, you're the only one that survived. See, that's a classic example of epigenetics. You must have biodiversity. I'll give you an example. Let's say tomorrow morning, Earth gets hit by a huge meteorite, and we have sulfuric acid in the atmosphere for the next year. I guarantee you, most people on planet Earth are going to die, but there's going to be a select few that can process sulfuric acid. And they're going to say, yum, this is a wonderful planet. I love sulfuric acid. They will survive. They will pass on their genes because we have to have biodiversity. We don't know what tomorrow will bring. So it could be an infinite number of factors.
Yeah.
Now, right now, we're dying from sugar.
Yeah.
And that's a good segue into COVID-19. We are dying from viruses. Now, this is really controversial, but it's in my book. It's on page 25. I wasn't thinking of viruses at the time, but I was thinking of the biochemistry of converting nitric oxide to oxygen. And I have it on page 25. You can look at it, it's right there. So let's talk about COVID, because that's captured the attention for sure of planet Earth. So what's a virus? A virus is just another guy hanging out on the planet. It's RNA. It cannot duplicate itself. It must have a live cell to pass on its genes. It needs your DNA. Okay?
Yeah.
So now I'm not getting into the politics of was it purposely made or was it, but it's real, it's there. So COVID-19 is just RNA code, and it's looking, let's go use the Palumbo thing at the
Okay.
emergency. So we're in the hospital and we look at so he comes in, he said, I want to look at your records. I hear there was a murder here. Okay. And you investigate that person. That person is a diabetic. 94% of the people in the emergency room and the
Yeah.
ICUs are diabetics who are dying from viruses. Don't you think we should look at the cause effect here?
Mhm.
Now, it's sugar. Okay, well, what's the mechanism? Back to asymmetric dimethylarginine. They're suffocating. They
Right.
cannot exchange L-arginine to nitric oxide. So their O2 levels are going down, down, down. The
Yeah.
hospitals are putting them on ventilators. They can expand their lungs, but they can't exchange the oxygen.
Wow.
Okay. So there's an article that came out, and I not work with him directly, but his name is Rainier Bozier. He's from Germany. He wrote an article this May. He looked at that chemical that we just talked about,
Okay.
and he found that the higher your asymmetric dimethylarginine, the notation is
Yes.
ADMA, the
Yes.
higher the ADMA in a hospital setting, you'll die. The lower the setting, you'll live. Now,
Mm.
why is that information being front and center? And I'm going to segue to Fauci. I will get political here. Where is our Surgeon General?
Yeah.
What's his name? He should be the one out in front and center.
Agreed.
Don't be a host.
Yeah.
If you don't eat sugar, oh, I love sugar. I know you love, everybody loves sugar, but viruses do too. So here's how it works. So a virus, and they're not political. They're just trying to raise their family like everybody else, and they're looking for food.
Right.
They need sugar. So if you breathe in a COVID-19 virus and they see sugar on those spike proteins,
Mm-hmm.
they get in the cell. That just makes sense. They want some food. They get
Right.
in the cell, they look around and say, oh, may I borrow your copy machine, which is your DNA? And of course, they're really not that polite. They just take it over. So they make millions of copies of your DNA or their DNA copied. Your lungs will fill up with cytokines. You know that term, which is inflammatory fluid,
Yeah.
and you die. It's that simple. Why is the Surgeon General not telling us don't be a host? Oh, maybe because they're not going to tell us the cause. They want us to go right to vaccines,
Right.
eat all the sugar you want. We'll just keep vaccinating you until you
Right.
run out of money.
Yeah.
This is a absolute fraud. It's sugar.
It
And
is
the
sugar.
literature is there. And I didn't make that up. Korean study, nursing homes, the higher level vitamin D protects you. That article just came out in May. The higher the AMA levels, you are going to die in a hospital setting. So the literature is there. We're just not hearing it through. They're hearing it now because of you, Joyce. But if the government was dispensing this, you would never hear it.
Right. Yeah. You touch on something that I was even curious about and wanted to ask you in the book. It was on page 37 where you are talking about ADMA and the nitric oxide. And also it's linking to cardiovascular disease,
Yep.
So I don't get, first of all, why is that? I don't think it is, because I've never had that test. Why doctors don't do
Put the
the
lights
test. There we go. Now we can see you.
Yeah.
I mean, why, they wouldn't test for that? It seems like it's just a simple blood test that can be done. Is it not?
It is.
You can test the levels, and those would be
Absolutely.
great biomarkers to be able to distinguish and signal if there is damage, to the endothelium and the inner lining of the blood vessels. So why you're constricting or not constricting.
This is the paper that Dr. Cook wrote in 2004. I'm speaking to him in 2005. I worked with him for 15 years.
Right.
So now I am lazy when it comes to that. So again, I said, Dr. Cook, walk me through this guy. I mean, he's written 500 papers. I mean, I read a lot of them, yes, but it's better to have a conversation like we're having and really get into nuts and bolts of this thing. So he says to me, it's called Cox Regression Analysis.
Okay.
So let me walk you through that one. So I like to make metaphors. So you're going to the races, you got 13 horses to bet on. So one horse is gray, one horse finished first last race, another one. So you're handicapped. What is the best handicapper in medicine? And that is asymmetric dimethylarginine. It's 3 times more specific than C-reactive protein.
Wow. Wow.
For
Really? And
inflammation.
yet I've never heard about it until your book.
I know. So why?
That
He
blows my
taught me that.
mind.
I mean, it's like I would have never got this answer. I met with the best people in the world. Dr. Cook's the world's leading authority. He's now at Baylor. He's the head of stem cell research, by the way, and also COVID-19.
Wow.
I talk to him all the time. Dr. Dellon, #1 person in the world in peripheral nerve surgery. Dr. Hamlet at Harvard, #1 person in lasers that has something to do with the treatment of this. Aaron Filler, Harvard. He's now at UCLA. I just called them. And
Right.
they're very, very receptive to my questions, but they've all written hundreds of articles, and that takes a lot of time to digest.
It does.
So that's how I did it. I just said, just walk me through it, you know, and they did.
So when you have a patient come to you, is this a test that you would perform on them, or, have them run those labs for that? So
Yeah,
you
yeah.
get that information and get that feedback
Right.
back. And have you had people where it's come back and it's like, wow, it's proven this is what's going on here?
Yes.
Yeah, it's been great feedback for you. It's crazy that I've never had that happen with any doctor, and I've gone in for high blood pressure that I would think, C-reactive protein, they do, although they even try and talk you out of that at times, saying, you could just be inflamed with a little cold. It isn't really giving us a great benchmark, or I don't really trust that test. I'm like, well, I'll just get it anyways. But now that I know of this test, I'm going to do it. And ladies, I will put that test in the link, later, the show notes. So you have that if you want to ask your doctor for it also.
Well, and this is a smart ass answer to the question. How do doctors learn post graduation? Now, this is my smart ass answer. I say they go to the University of Morton's. Morton's Steakhouse is up on Scottsdale Road, and the pharmaceutical companies take us there for these fabulous dinners, and they're good, but they're selling drugs.
Right.
That's what they are. And most doctors, I should say, all doctors are, where do you hurt? Here's your medicine, next. I do that too. But, I can't pass you by without telling you the truth.
Right.
What you're doing to yourself is why you're inflamed.
Yeah.
And I hear it every day. Well, what do you think? It's easy for you to say. I get that a lot, by the way.
You do from your patients.
Yeah, it's not that easy. I love sugar too. I ate all that crap, but I know the effect, and it is a poison. Here's an interesting paper that I read. And this came from Johns Hopkins too. Arsenic is the same mechanism as high fructose corn syrup.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, excuse me. Where's the FDA in this conversation? Okay. Arsenic is sweet. Arsenic, remember, I don't know if you remember the book, but Arsenic and Old Lace was a famous book of how to slowly poison somebody. You put arsenic in their tea,
okay,
and you raise the dose each day, and they just pass away because they don't know they're being poisoned. Because it's sweet. It tastes great. It kills the B vitamins, and specifically thiamine. And that's the same way that high fructose corn syrup is destroying your B vitamins. So that's another pathway. Now, I don't want to get too far into the biochemistry, but that helps convert L-arginine to nitric oxide.
Wow.
So
amazing.
we could talk about biochemistry forever.
I know. I can't believe we're already getting close to the top of our hour, and we have questions that came in from
let's get
ladies.
some questions.
So I want to ask you questions, and if we have time, you can even share some stories of patients. You kind of touched on one question that came in was, how do you handle, when someone comes to you saying, it's hard, I know what to do, or I'm hearing what you're saying, but how do I get myself to eat right? I mean, what kind of things do you tell people? I mean, I tell them just read the beginning of your book, and that alone
Yeah.
would shock me into, okay, I'm going to cut sugar.
Well, ketogenic diet is the diet, and we were discussing, you and I were discussing this the other day. There is a fundamental difference between men and women. Men are from Mars, women for Saturn. You know this story. It is true phylogenetically in terms of our genes.
Right.
And as I mentioned to you the other day, and this is not a sexist answer, but this is real. 3,000 years ago, the male and you're in a cave, for God's sake. You didn't have any food. The woman probably had 12 or 16 kids in there. It was a struggle. Paleolithic diet, which is the correct term for ketogenic diet, is what you had to eat in your local environment. The man probably went out hunting, and he went hunting for small game, and it probably took him weeks to find it. And he had to bring it back to the cave. Meantime, the woman was probably fermenting roots and herbs. That's why she's more of a vegetarian versus the carnivore of the hunter-gatherer.
Mm-hmm.
Are we both omnivores? Yes, of course. But men prefer meat. They get their B12 out of that. They need more B12, I think, than women who get their B12 out of fermented foods. And it's not as great as meat. So I think that's the fundamental difference. We still have to get those nutrients, and we need fat in our diet. Carbohydrates break down to sugar. That's what we don't need.
Yes.
But when we can get a hold of it, like honey, we'll send somebody up a tree and get that honey. That's what kings did, and that's why the king was fat,
right?
Because he got somebody else to get the sugar for him. It's that simple.
Right.
So let me have some questions, because I know we're getting late on there.
Yeah, let's start. So the first question is, let me read this here. Have you seen complete healing in someone who has had 6 nerve palsy with lowering their blood pressure by doing so? If so, is it a long process? Have you had any patients like that?
Yes. If you go on a strict ketogenic diet, do the supplements, you will improve that. Now, that's not my field per se, but it still applies. There's 5 phases of neuropathy of compression. In the beginning, first phase 1 and 2, there's just some tingling and some mild symptoms. If you change your diet there, absolutely it's going to reverse. But if you get into phase 5, where it's fibrosed down, then it's probably a surgical issue. So, and that's the same for all these nerves.
Okay, how about if someone has been type 2 diabetic for 17 years and is not insulin, they're not on insulin, but they are taking metformin, is it still possible to eliminate the type 2 diabetes, to reverse that if they haven't gone to insulin yet?
Absolutely. First of all,
I think so too.
Okay, so that's why I don't like this classification. I don't think there's any such thing as type 1, 2, 3, 50, or it doesn't matter. It's sugar, and it causes insulin resistance, and that's the problem. But it really matters what genes you're carrying.
Right.
So there's a disease called Krabbe's disease.
Okay.
And that's considered a metabolic disease. You die by the age of 2. Wow. You're loaded with genes that can't process carbohydrates. Now, here's an interesting sidebar story to that. So Dr. Kurtzberg, she's at Duke, and I met her a couple of years ago. She's a world's famous stem cell researcher.
Okay.
And she's talking about Krabbe's disease on a pair of twins who are at age 2. One died, and she gave them, or the other one, sibling, stem cell. The kid lived, and he's still alive. Well, wait a minute. I said, Dr. Kurtzberg, how is that a genetic disease? She said, well, it is. I said, well, it's, in my way of thinking, genetics is immutable. Doesn't matter what you do, you're going to die. But you gave them stem cell. You reverse that. That's epigenetic. What's the trigger? I said it's sugar. Oh, no, it's not. Well, yes, it is. and you gave them stem cells, so it reversed and reshuffled your genes, that kid's living. That's impressive.
That
She's
is
also
impressive.
treating muscular dystrophy, same issue.
Wow.
Same issue. Those kids are walking autism.
Yeah.
She has films of them. She gives them stem cells. It reverses, in my opinion, autism and autism spectrum disorders is the hypoglossal nerve, the 12th cranial nerve. It innervates the tongue. You can't express yourself. You're going to be autistic.
Yeah.
It's sugar. It compresses that nerve.
Fascinating. Fascinating.
So, but of course, they look at me like, oh, you think everything is caused by sugar? You know what? I do.
Well, when the truth is the truth, what else can you say? Okay, another question. Is there a correlation between MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome, and prediabetes? I'm sure eating a diet filled with sugar and processed foods would exacerbate the condition. Is this true? And for all those who don't know what mast cell activation syndrome is, tell me if I'm correct. It's the allergy cells that are responsible for like an immediate allergic reaction. So again, like that inflammation, that swelling, is that kind of correct?
It is.
Okay.
Let's just, this whole autoimmune
Yeah.
notion, I should say, I think it's a notion, as if the body is fighting against itself. No, the body is doing what these white cells are supposed to do. When the white cells are very sensitive to vitamin C and sugar, and if sugar takes over the role of vitamin C, they will storm into wherever that inflammation is happening, and they will cause destruction.
Right.
That's what's essentially called autoimmune disease.
Okay.
And you have all these different inflammatory cytokines, interleukin 1, interleukin 2, it goes on forever. I think of it in terms of this. If you throw a stone into a still pond of water, you'd see the ripples go across. Inflammation number one gene, 2 genes, 3 genes, when they intersect, and that's what that means, where the white cells intersect. Leukin means white cell.
Okay.
Where they intersect, if you have 1 intersection, 2 intersection, interleukin 11, I think there's now 13, you're going to get at that intersection of that inflammation, the itis and the destruction of that tissue, and we're going to put a label on it.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same process. So type 1 diabetes is just earlier stage. You got more genes to express. Krabbe's disease, I mean, you don't have but a couple of weeks. If you give this kid's formula, he's going to die.
Right.
Because he can't process it.
Right.
So I hope I answered that question for you.
Well, so mast cell, so you would then say that even for something like MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome, that sugar certainly plays a role in that, and that
it is the role.
It is the role. Okay. Well, we heard it from the doctor, ladies. It is the role. We could probably place our bets that every answer is going to be sugar is the culprit. This would be a great betting game. I'd win. Okay. Our last question is, I have trigeminal neuralgia due to an injured, okay, so it's a different reason, due to an injured nerve from a Novocaine shot. Ouch. That happened back in 2011. And she did have the microvascular decompression, right? This is the Dellon procedure that unfortunately it failed to improve her condition. Would you say that sugar, regardless of the injured and the injury to the nerve now, that it still plays a role in the continued pain that she's dealing with and the lack of improvement in the TN?
Yes.
Yeah.
So here's how I look at that mechanism. First of all, the trigeminal neuralgia, they're very painful condition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned suicide. The suicide.
It's the
syndrome.
suicide nerve. This is ironic. The guy who invented the decompression in the mastoid was at the University of Pennsylvania as a neurosurgeon resident when I was there at the same time, taught by Dr. Shuda.
Okay.
I did not know him, but I was in his same clinical rotation. He figured out that trigeminal neuralgia is really the nerve sitting very close to the blood vessel, and his procedures put a piece of Teflon between the two vessels, or
Wow.
the nerve and the vessel.
Okay.
That's his contribution. Dr. Dellon's is more of a surgical decompression. Now, there's a new procedure, it's not real new, but it's the gamma knife procedure.
Yeah, I read about that and wanted to ask you about that with the
And
radiation, right?
yes, gamma radiation, which I think is a very good procedure to do. You would have to go to a big university setting. We have that here in Arizona, gamma knife at Barrows Neurologic. That's the go-to procedure, I would think, for that problem. And that's patients should seek that out.
Okay. Wow. So leave us with maybe one or two stories that you can recall that just had a huge impact on you as a physician, knowing that your work had impacted somebody other than doing a procedure on them, but actually talking to them, or somebody that, I read Amazon reviews, people are having, great results from just reading your book, and it's changed their lives. So is there someone in particular that stood out for you that came, and what was their situation, him or hers, and how did that, what did you say to them, and did they take your advice, and did they reverse something? Share with us.
Well, they did. Well, the very first surgery I did on my own was the most profound for me, because I really didn't know what I was doing.
Okay.
No, I trained with
Yikes.
Dr. Dellon, and it's easy to be operating with the world's leading authority.
Yeah.
Okay, it's like your driver's lesson. You
Right.
have the pro there, but the patient on my own, because now remember, the paradigm was then and still is now, oh, that's a dangerous procedure.
Right.
Okay, so I have this patient, she comes in, and I had treated her on and off for many years, and she had amputation after amputation. And I said to her, I don't know what else to do, but I learned this new procedure. She actually had a twin sister who died from diabetes.
Mm.
And I said, if you want to try it, she was in a wheelchair. And I said, basically, what do you have to lose,
Right.
So she said, let's do it. I did the surgery. This is kind of a weird story. So I did the surgery. She lived, but I didn't see her for a couple months. And she came back, and I was in the hospital at that time. And she came back into the hospital, and she was walking, not in a wheelchair,
Wow.
with a cast on her arm. And I'm going, what? I said, let's just call her Janet. I said, Janet, I said, what happened? She said, well, I couldn't walk. So my husband took me to Hawaii, and I was climbing on the lava rocks, slipped, fell, and broke my arm. I want to thank you. Is that a bizarre story?
That's a bizarre thank you.
Yeah, but thank you
She's
for
so
breaking.
happy she could walk to break her arm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I went, wow. And if I could fix her nerve problem, I could fix anybody's. And that's true. So I've done thousands of these. I don't mean to belittle it. It is, there's a technique, but the more you do, the better you get.
Yes.
So I've done, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5. I don't count them anymore.
Amazing.
Yeah.
What about diet? People, how do you get across to a patient that, they need to change their diet? And do you get across to them?
They do, but it's not as high as I'd like it to be.
Yeah.
I think what you read in the first chapter of the book, if they read the book and they can put themselves in that kind of consciousness,
Yes.
then they change.
Right.
But you have to treat it like an addiction, like any other addiction. You have to say, I am addicted to sugar.
Yes.
And I'm willing to make that change. I was addicted to sugar. If you ask me, no, I wasn't. Yes, I was.
Right.
I love those little lemon squares, the sugar, with a cup of coffee. Things like that. I'm from Philadelphia. Bread is a big part of our culture.
Right.
Giving that up is difficult.
Sure.
Now, do I eat carbohydrates? Yes, but I really am pretty much a ketogenic person. I really watch my diet.
Yes.
But it's doable.
And you read labels.
I do. Well,
Yes.
let's leave the audience with this simple way to do it. Divide 4 into the total carbohydrates on the label, and you will get the number of teaspoons that are in that product. I don't care if they say 1 gram of added sugar, which is a trick. You want to know if there's 32 grams of carbs in that product. You divide 4 into 32, you got 8 teaspoons of sugar. Would you put 8 teaspoons of sugar in anything? And the answer, of course not.
Right.
But if they put it in for you, then you feel like, well, I don't really eat sugar. I just eat carbohydrates. When that's the answer to the question.
Right.
You shouldn't have any more than 6 teaspoons of sugar in the entire day.
Yes. That's what we
So,
preach. I say 25 grams, but that equals out to 6. So
yep.
same thing. And just following the WHO guidelines, and yeah, and reading labels. It's so crucial. And you ladies heard it. You heard it from him. It's not easy. There's no simple
No,
solution.
it's not.
And nobody's perfect. We're not claiming, because Dr. Jacoby wrote a book. He's not saying he doesn't perhaps have, a little piece of bread from now and again, that he's not having a piece. I know we love our dark chocolate, and you might have a little dark chocolate here or there, but it's reading those labels, keeping it under the 25 grams, and it's getting away from that ultra processed sugar. Like you talked about at the beginning, how sugar came over originally. It's like, and then what happened to the sugar, the whole processing of it is like what really like strips us, the sugar, of all of its nutrients, its vitamins, minerals, and it just takes the fiber out of everything. And it just makes it, like you said, high fructose corn syrup, the worst for us. And it's just pure poison. It is. On our last call, I was saying it was like rat poisoning. Might as well just eat rat poisoning. It's the same thing.
Yeah, it is.
It is.
Arsenic.
It is. Yeah, arsenic. Exactly. Killing you slowly. Right. Oh, it has been such a pleasure having you join us tonight. I am so thankful. I mean, you are a mentor and an inspiration of mine. And I hope you really get that now tonight. I mean, 10 years we've known each other. And I thank you for all your support, and for taking time out tonight on your Friday night when you could be at home. You just had a long day at the office. You're still there. And to join me and my ladies tonight. This is from all of us. We really do appreciate you taking the time from your busy schedule and for imparting your wisdom on us this evening. So thank you, Dr. Jacoby. And ladies, just a reminder, everything that the doctor said that I say always, if you're questioning anything, here's our disclaimer, go to your doctor, get those tests. I'm going to put some of those tests, in the links, the show links for you. And, it's not a diagnosis, anything tonight that he's saying. He's not saying do this and you're cured. But yeah, probably follow that diet strict. I heard the doc saying strict. That's very key when you're trying to make change. Not, 2 days out of the 5-7 day week, but 7 days, 24/7 that you're doing that. If you're talking about real reversal here. So key. So again, thank you, Dr. Jacoby. Thank you all for showing up. We'll have this on the replay tomorrow, and you're awesome, and have a wonderful holiday. We're getting into the holiday season here. So
Yep. And this is the tough season. Sugar.
It's the tough season, but my ladies got it. We're going to do it. We're going to kick through, and we're kicking sugar for sure.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Great having a doctor like you in our corner. And thanks a lot. All right, ladies, have a good night. Thank you, Dr. Jacoby.
Thank you.
Bye.